I think CNN is complete trash, and I just started laughing because I was thinking about when I produce a segment like this. Actually, let me stop. This story is from the Epoch Times. It's titled, "Why Many of Today's News Reporters Believe It Is Their Duty to Lie to You." And I was laughing just before hitting record because I was thinking, like, man, Jim Acosta really is worse than Don Lemon. And that made me laugh because Don Lemon is just so awful. Look, I always go to it, but Don Lemon once asked a panel if the missing Malaysian airline was sucked into a black hole. That's hilarious. And his panel guest then said, a small black hole would swallow the whole universe. And I'm just like, am I listening to CNN or InfoWars? Right? And that's probably why they hate InfoWars so much. But I got to say, I do think Jim Acosta is he's probably the worst person in media. He is the definition of a grifter. He lies. He lies. He's putting on a show. He's showboating. God, the man drives me insane with how awful and disgusting he is. Let's talk about opinion content. This is about as opinionated as I get. I think Jim Acosta is the worst of the worst. I'll say it, worse than Don Lemon. This story is actually interesting. Jim Acosta comes up because Brian Cates, who writes for the Epoch Times, points out, he breaks down how Jim Acosta lies and decontextualizes what Trump is actually saying in reference to asylum seekers. Jim Acosta does this, in my opinion, likely to build a following. Before we jump into this, go to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a monthly donation option, cryptocurrency options, physical address, or just hit the share button, hit that like button, leave a comment, because that really, really helps. If you do those simple things, it tells YouTube must be a good video. Greatly appreciated, or do nothing. Feel free to hate me, whatever. Let's read the story from the Epoch Times. Brian Cates writes, President Donald Trump rolled out a new immigration plan in a press conference held at the White House Rose Garden on May 16th that focused on addressing the major flaws in America's current immigration laws and border control system. During his presentation of his new plan, Trump said the following. Now I want to stop here and make a point. The role of a journalist, it's not just to give you facts or convey information. It's to help you understand what is most likely to be true. Context is extremely important. Framing is extremely important. Intellectual honesty. So let's see what Donald Trump said. Trump is quoted as saying, "We must also restore the integrity of our broken asylum system. Our nation has a proud history of affording protection to those fleeing government persecutions. Unfortunately, legitimate asylum seekers are being displaced by those lodging frivolous claims. These are frivolous claims to gain admission into our country. Asylum abuse also strains our public school systems, our hospitals, and local shelters using funds that should and that have to go to elderly veterans, at-risk youth, Americans in poverty, and those in genuine need of protection. We're using the funds that should be going to them, and that shouldn't happen." Trump finished by saying, "My plan expedites relief for legitimate asylum seekers by screening out the meritless claims. If you have a proper claim, you will be quickly admitted. If you don't, you'll be promptly returned home." Let me break this down for you as a journalist should. Something to the effect of, in a statement made at the Rose Garden, Donald Trump expressed that many legitimate asylum seekers are being displaced by fraudulent claims, and by weeding through those that are falsely claiming asylum, we can better protect asylum seekers. That's the context. Okay? Trump says, hey, we have a long history of this. Let's help asylum seekers. And there's a lot of people trying to abuse the system because it's an effective way to get in the country. Let's stop that so we can really help people. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. What did Jim Acosta do? Well, according to the Epoch Times, in an act of brazen dishonesty, here's how CNN's Jim Acosta summarized for his audience what the president said. Quote, Trump in Rose Garden speech paints asylum seekers with broad brush, accusing them of misleading immigration authorities at the border. Quote, these are frivolous claims. That bit of sophistry quickly drew the ire of the official Trump War Room account on Twitter, which called out Acosta's dishonest reporting. How can you do this and go home at night thinking you've turned in an honest day's work as a journalist? And Acosta said, Hi, Trump War Room. In the transcript you provided, you note that Trump describes asylum claims as frivolous and meritless. The transcript also notes that Trump uses the term asylum abuse. Trump clearly is accusing asylum seekers of misleading immigration authorities, as I said. Jim Acosta knows what he's doing because he is a vile and disgusting, awful human being who's trying to prop himself up and make money, get himself a show, and that's been the opinion. You know, journalists don't like him. It's an open secret that the actual press corps thinks he's a disgusting, vile, sick human who is doing a disservice to true journalism. Look, there are very few people that I truly despise, truly despise, and truly think are evil. You know me, Tim Pool, the milquetoast fence sitter. I've repeatedly referred to, left-wing activists. I've called Mike Stuchberry, quote, one of the good ones in a video. If you don't know, he's an Antifa activist. I think maybe he's taken a darker turn in recent times, but I've absolutely defended people like him. I believe they are true believers. I believe that Mike really does believe what he's saying. Okay? Just because you have a different moral standard doesn't mean you're wrong or evil. It just means when I see someone like Mike, I think he doesn't understand certain concepts. That's fine. It doesn't mean he's trying to be evil. It just means he's wrong. And the best thing we can do when we look to people is not assume they're evil. It's to figure out what they're wrong about and have a real conversation. Unfortunately, for a lot of these people on the far left, they don't want to have it. They won't hear it. I don't know the solution, but I also know they're not typically evil. However, if I was going to point to a handful of people, and I've got a list, Jim Acosta is near the top of evil. He knows what he's doing. He doesn't care. He wants followers. He wants fame. That's why he grandstands. That's why he won't shut up. He's not asking real questions. He's hurting journalism for personal gain. That, to me, is evil. Pure evil. Jim Acosta is not a true believer. He doesn't actually believe what he's saying. He knows he's lying. That's just my opinion. Now, back to the Epoch Times, most people who saw what Acosta did here will wonder how he thinks he has any integrity whatsoever as a journalist after engaging in this kind of absurd behavior. Brian, I believe it's Brian, right? Yeah. Brian Cates adds, I happen to know quite well how people in the DNC media complex like Jim Acosta can do this kind of thing every single day and actually think of themselves as being heroic for doing so. He says, let's go back to 2008 for a minute. The Associated Press's Washington bureau chief, Ron Fournier, introduced the concept of accountability journalism publicly back in 2008, which gives reporters a license to go beyond just reporting the facts of a news story in a neutral and objective manner to instead begin putting their thumbs on the scale and start pressing down hard to ensure a desired politicized outcome is clearly seen in the reporting. It gives them a duty to shape the story toward political outcomes. Fournier basically endorsed the idea that journalists need to stop seeing themselves as neutral relators of facts and begin shaping narratives for the public in order to hold the powerful accountable. No. Pundits do that. Political commentators do that. Activists do that. Not journalists. Now, you can be both. You can be a journalist and an activist, but you have to know when to separate the two, and it depends on what your activism is about. I know many people who are far left activists that I would absolutely call honest journalists. The issue is they only focus on issues pertaining to their subject matter that they advocate for. And I fall into a very similar category. Now, when it comes to what we do over on, there's a caveat here as to why I would, come to my own defense. What we do over on Subverse is called journalism. You'll notice that our stories are not about my personal opinion, perspective, and they're not related to subjects that I think are important. If you look at my Tim Pool channel, which is my name, you'll see it's very much so me talking about issues I think are more important than anything else, but clearly hyper-focused. This, I would say, you could call, to a certain extent, advocacy journalism. I'm not lying. I'm being completely honest. I'm just only focused on these core issues: freedom of speech, liberty, the escalation of conflict rhetoric from the left, and things I find extremely damaging and threatening to us. So that is, in a sense, advocacy journalism. I advocate for free expression, free speech, open internet, the free flow of data, and I was doing that long before I was ever a journalist. However, you'll notice over on our Subverse channel, where I do actual journalism, there is, there's definitely stories on censorship, but we have expert interviews. We talk about bacteria eating oil and methane. We talk about 3D printing, norma generation, internet platforms, and censorship. We talk about tech giants, the acceleration of unprecedented extinction. A lot of these issues are things that I don't typically talk about on my personal, analysis and opinion programs. This is called journalism. But look at someone like Jim Acosta, okay? This is where the line shifts. Jim stands up on a grandstand and pushes for something without actually doing journalism. So here's the thing. Can we call Jim Acosta a journalist? The answer is a resounding no. Accountability journalism does not exist. You know why? It should be called accountability sophistry. Manipulating facts to manipulate people into your desired political outcome. That's not journalism. Journalism is relaying facts and trying to frame them as honestly as possible. Now, it's true, I'm wrong often. I don't know everything. So when I do a video, be it this one or even any video on my main channel, that's my research. That's what I found and what I truly believe to be true. I can say the same for many people on the far left. They focus on research. They do the same thing. I try my best to break through barriers. I browse anarchist subreddits, far left subreddits, as well as right-wing ones and places like 4chan, so that I can actually try and see where are people's mindsets in this country. You do have a lot of people who believe they're honest and put out fake information. It's just a part, of journalism. People aren't always 100% correct. Jim Acosta, on the other hand, grandstands, stands up, shouts, argues with the president, doesn't actually ask any substantive questions, just tries to get into fights, and then lies on Twitter. There you go. Brian writes, in our modern age, such quaint notions as journalistic objectivity and neutrality have been utterly dispensed with. What was once considered ethical malpractice in journalism is now expected and even encouraged in many newsrooms. You can read more here about the entire accountability journalism philosophy and how some media outlets immediately embraced it while others quickly questioned it. So let me go back and stress on my work, right? I think in accountability journalism, it's probably fair to say can exist to a certain extent in that you can focus on the problems of a certain group or individual without putting your thumb on the scale necessarily. When I make videos on my main channel, I try to make sure all of my sources are credible. I use various fact-checking organizations to make sure the sources I'm using are fair and accurate. And it is still somewhat an analysis and opinion video. But when it comes to what we're doing with Subverse, it is entirely just regular journalism. I don't tell you what, like often when we record these videos for Subverse, so admittedly, most of the work is being done by someone else in terms of research and fact checking and script writing. I do this. I read those stories and I'm sitting there looking at the story like, I have to say something about this. We don't. We leave out 99.99% of opinion. Sometimes there's some stuff in there. It's just a normal part of, news. We try to make sure it's not in there. But that's called journalism. That you might personally disagree or need to say something about the dangers or the problem of, and you don't. We've done a bunch of stories on global warming. We stick to the facts and expert opinions. And I disagree with some of it politically, and I think, there's certain issues, but it's the expert's opinion, not mine. We report the facts. That's journalism. Is CNN doing that? Please. They target people for suspension. They reach out to Facebook and try and get people banned who don't even break the rules. And it's Mafic Media. They did this. CNN did this. They reached out to Facebook and said, why are you allowing this? They're funded by Russia. Not against the rules. Facebook suspended them anyway. So is CNN journalism? No, of course not. It's absurd. Or at least Jim Acosta. Yes, CNN does journalism. Don't get me wrong. So I don't want to read through this whole thing, but I'll put a link to the story on the description so you can read it. But basically, there's a really important point to be brought up is that in today's landscape for media, they can't just tell you the facts because the facts are simple. People want a fight. They want the villain. So there you go. But admittedly, when it comes to these big corporations, these big, VC-backed digital media outlets, they hire people on purpose. We know that, according to The Outline, a news outlet, Mike.com was being run by, tech bros, not social justice activists. But they hired these people to produce that narrative they wanted. So, admittedly, I will say this. There's a big difference between Tim Pool as an individual making opinion videos, okay? I get it. I have opinions. I'm very opinionated. I talk about these things. I try to make sure my opinions are based in fact, and I'm reasonable and willing to actually try and understand the other side in good faith. The organization we're putting together, Subverse, we just do news. We're going to do interviews, expert interviews, and it's going to be regular old boring journalism. That's the goal. CNN is trying to get people banned. CNN is an activist organization. There's a difference. I'll leave it there. Thanks for hanging out. Stick around. Next segment will come up shortly for those on YouTube, youtube.com/TimCast at 4 p.m. for the next video, and I will see you then.